I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about Mindabi.
Before we get into this week's film, next week we're going to be watching Broadcast News. I know nothing about this film, Andrew. Why did you pick this film?
Is a really good movie. It's probably like top five romantic comedy films for me.
Wow, those are
Great
some big
cast,
words.
great writing.
Who's the
Um,
director?
James L. Brooks.
Okay. I don't know if I've seen any of I know who James L. Brooks is, but I don't think I've seen any of his stuff. He didn't make very that many movies. He only made 7 films. Is he still alive? He looks
He's still
old.
alive.
Okay.
No, he's still alive. Yeah.
Good for him.
I mean, he's produced a lot of movies, that's for sure.
Oh, he produced Big. Love Big.
Yeah.
Fucking love Big. Jerry Maguire. Okay. Well, I'm down. I'm excited. Is there anything
Yeah.
I should
It's
know going into this movie?
no, I mean, I don't know. It's just again, it's just it, it's just a good kind of sort of I guess like quotes around the rom part of rom-com. But yeah, it's like a good kind of uh comedy drama film with an amazing cast. Like it really does have an amazing cast. And everyone in it is really good. So I don't know, it's pretty, pretty cut and dry.
Wow. Well, I'm excited. But for this week, we watched Mindabi and I took notes, which I've never done before. I like recorded notes and then listened back to the notes after it just to try to be more diligent about it because I have a tendency to forget a lot of the film. And I feel like it helped. I had a lot of thoughts, and particularly something that I want to talk a lot about is like the use of color in this film and like uh like the use of like blues and greens because like their outfits are really cool. Like they have some really cool costumes.
Hmm.
I mean, they look awesome.
Yeah. Hmm.
But I don't know. I don't remember any of the name of the characters, which I feel bad about. What's the name of the father, husband, the main guy? What's his name? Does it start with an I? Is it like
They don't mention his name a lot, but his name is like
okay,
yeah, Ibrahima is his
Ibrahima?
name. Yeah.
Okay. Great name. Great writing, by the way. I mean, I know it's obviously translated from its original language because it was shot and filmed in Dakar,
Yeah,
right?
which is a
Am I
city
right
in
about that?
Senegal.
Okay.
Right.
And I think it's interesting that the film opens with sort of the shaving and the haircut, right? Because it's like this thing that sort of
Yeah.
brings sort of all people together, right? No matter like what class you're at, no matter who you are, you
Mhm.
all have to like shave and get a haircut. Like it's something that's sort of at the core of what we all do. Like we can't control the fact that uh, we're sort of at our base level most human in those kinds of moments. And this is very much a film about class structure and sort of these very specific uh, hierarchy that is sort of built in this world. And it reminds me a lot of the short story that I just finished, The Pearl by John Steinbeck. It actually is a very similar premise to The Pearl. And so in The
Mhm.
Pearl, the
Yeah.
idea is that it takes place in a small Hispanic community in Mexico, and the whole community, this poor community, basically survives by like fishing for, I don't know, was it oysters that have clams in them, or oysters that have pearls in them, or is that clams? Whatever has right, whatever oysters, clams, whatever has pearls in
Mhm.
them, and so that's what they do. And the protagonist finds like the biggest pearl they've ever found, right? And he's super
Mhm.
excited. But it ends up becoming a curse because, of course, everyone in this town sort of colludes to like offer
Mhm.
him basically nothing for it. And everything he does sort of just makes life worse, which is exactly what happens here, right? At the beginning of the film, he gets this money order for 25,000 francs or something, 25,000 something. I don't know
It's
what
25,000
city it is.
francs.
Okay, it is francs. Which it's always hard to figure out like how much money things are when a film's from the 1960s and it's a different currency, but
Mhm.
it's a lot of money as far as I can tell.
Right, yeah.
But
For
no
them,
matter
for
for
in
them,
their yeah.
in their situation, I guess. But they're kind of cursed by it, right? They spend the whole film sort of obsessed with it, and it seems like their life just ends up being worse having the money order than if they never got the money
Mhm.
order in the first
Yeah.
place.
I'm assuming that the movie ends like in a way where you don't know what's going to happen, but the I assume we have to I feel like we have to assume the worst and that he had to sell his house,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's what I'm assuming is the end, which at the beginning they have the house and they're fine with the house and everything, and then by the end of it, you know, in theory is the theory is that he sells his house. He has to get rid of his property.
Hmm.
Um which is uh yeah, I mean like this movie is just like it's like just like a hellish experience. Like I found the whole thing extremely this movie's great too because I feel like it's a movie that operates with um commentary on colonial rule, but it almost operates kind of like in the background.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's not like a Heart of Darkness type of thing. It's more kind of like the idea of money, the idea of a
Hmm.
market based society has now sort of infiltrated regular life in Senegal, and even among people who are quote unquote lower class. It is sort of imposed this lower class system, and you see when he interacts with people, Ibrahima, he like uh, when he meets people that are more educated than him or people who know French. You know, knowing French seems to be like a thing that is really important if you want to
Yeah.
reach a higher class. Um, and but what happens is that like people take advantage of him, the fact that he can't read, which is really frustrating to watch.
Yeah. There's something incredibly not only bureaucratic, of course, but almost Kafka-esque in the way he's trying to get his money order, right? He's given basically money. He's basically given 25,000 francs at the beginning of it. But because of the fact that he's from this lower class and so he doesn't have things like a identity card or this thing or that thing, right? He doesn't know what month he's born. So we just get this
It's
trial
just like
of
every time he has to like go to a different thing, it's just like, oh my God. Yeah, like you can see it coming, right? Like
yeah.
we like it's so clear the organization.
Hmm. And of course, like on one hand, this organization is built to hypothetically protect the community and the communities around it because you don't want people to be stealing money and these sorts of things. But it's also built a system where it's impossible for people of lower class to climb up that ladder. Like because of the fact he cannot read, everyone at every single turn takes advantage of him, no matter where he goes. And I'm so conflicted by our protagonist himself because, like, on the one hand, he seems to do things that seem very generous, right? And that's sort of like what tears him down. And sort of the tragedy of this piece and sort of his fatal flaw is he keeps trying to give away stuff. He offers money to people, he gives away rice and all these different things, and people take advantage of that very thing. And so by the end of the piece, he's sort of bitter about it and feels like the world has sort of attacked him and defeated him. And no matter what he does, people are going to take advantage of him. And it's just sort of, I don't know. And then on the other hand, he like beats his wife and stuff. And I think the gender politics of this film is also really
Yeah.
fascinating
Yeah, they touch on that.
because sort of all of the dialogue, sort of all of the big actions are men sitting around talking to each other doing this. But in the background, like everything that's actually done in the film, all the things that keep the house together, that keep the community together, no matter what level they're at, is all women. Like women are
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
core of this society, and they're the right. They take care of the children, they cook, they clean. I mean, they basically do everything in whatever class structure that they're in. They
Mhm.
kind of control everything, and yet they have no power, which is this really interesting dynamic because we see at the beginning of the film he yells at his wife for letting him sleep and sleeping through prayer, and of course God, and they're Muslim, so this idea of the holy Muhammad. And I love how often they use that phrase, which of course they use whenever uh, people from the Islam religion greet each other, right? Peace be upon you and upon you too.
Salam,
and,
yeah,
and sort of
Assalamu
the
alaikum.
small income, right? The irony of that every time they meet, because they say it to people like they're kind of at war with in this certain sense. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. You're kind of like when you're introduced to like the village and the community there. I like to think that like because everybody is struggling, everyone is very generous to each other, right? I'll pay
yeah,
you later. I'll do this for you. I'll do that for you. And but as soon as like the money order from Paris, France comes
yeah.
in, right? It sort of acts as almost like this poisoning agent.
Hmm.
And you can take that however way you want, right? It can be a metaphor for, colonialism,
Hmm.
right? Like it's funny too. It's like it's money that it was accumulated by a guy who moved from where they are, Dakar. So it's like a village outside of Dakar, to Paris, France.
Right.
And there's that great scene where he's doing the voiceover,
It's beautiful.
the cousin. Yeah, it's a great moment. Yeah, it's great. And he's like talking about like, I need a job, I need to make money, I can't be poor anymore. I want to like help my family and everything. So here's a bunch of money. Please like cash it out. And like, have some for yourself and give it to my family or whatever. Um, but all these things, I need a job, I need this, I need that, we need this, we need that. It's all predicated on like this like market based society that
Hmm.
wasn't I'd like to assume wasn't there before colonial rule,
Right.
right? I think that's like I think that's kind of a big point of the movie is that like, you know, we before, maybe people didn't necessarily have like cars and TVs and suits, but they were at least like probably somewhat, in a comfortable position and they trusted one another and they probably were able to, um, yeah, like they were able to trust each other. But once you start like introducing kind of like this system, this market-based capitalistic system, and you introduce money into it, money that's not even money from another country,
Hmm.
um, it creates distrust. It creates people coveting each other. It just kind of creates a country in which that we live in today called the United States, like, you know, and before I watched this movie, I watched his first movie, Black Girl.
Black girl.
And Black Girl's a really good movie. I liked it a lot. And what happens is that she's like a caretaker in Dakar for this French family, and
Right.
then she ends up moving to France with the family. But as soon as they move to France, the parents, like her bosses, the married couple, they suddenly become really mean. They become way more mean than they were before in Senegal. And
Mm.
she kind of like there's a lot of like voiceover talking about how like the country, like what the hell is going on here, And I think I think like with Mendabi, it's saying that like the same could happen to Senegal like it has happened in France.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see sort of the way this town functions, and even though this town outside of Dakar isn't in the best of conditions, they have to get their own water. And water, of course, is also sort of a big thing here because they don't have running water in this community. So a
Right.
lot of their time is spent going and fetching water and doing these sorts of things. And like people will go and sell water from place to place
Mhm.
so they don't have to
Yeah.
go and get it themselves. And sort of the way that their life is surrounded by sort of the more basic functions of life. And for better or worse, I mean, they're happy, they're alive. He's got many wives and children, and life
Yeah,
isn't perfect, but he's existing, and he's not, necessarily happy or sad. He just like he's okay with the world. But the moment that 25,000 money order in, which I think is intriguing too, that he is the last one in the town to know about the money that's given to him. Because of
right.
course,
Yeah,
right, the
it
central
travels so
nervous system.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because the central nervous system of this community and all of these communities is the women, right? We talk about them being sort of the core of this community. And so the way that they kind of talk to each other and how suddenly everyone's quote unquote generous to him, they start lending him all of this
Yeah.
stuff because they're expecting sort of the payback in the future. It's like that idea of when you win the lottery and
Yeah,
suddenly
yeah. And
like
everyone's like,
everyone
yeah.
comes out of the woodwork. It's the
Everyone's like,
same.
wow.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly what you see is like people creating the illusion of kindness. And I think it's interesting that even though we're mostly from his perspective, we still see sort of their comments outside of that, right? That we can see what they're doing, not only sort of in the maliciousness of it
Mhm.
and the fact that I don't know if he's unwilling to see their maliciousness or it's just going over his head or what it is, or like his genuine belief in the goodness of mankind and humans. And we see that a lot, even though he does some questionable things, particularly, beating his wife isn't great, but it's
I'm
not
okay.
like it's pro that.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with these things just because like he's an imperfect kind of like slovenly guy, right? Like he
Yeah.
kind of like when he's like eating at the beginning and he's like being very what's the
That food looks
word?
delicious, by the way.
He's like kind of gluttonous a little bit.
Yeah.
Um yeah, it's just like it's he's just like yeah, he's like kind of like an imperfect kind of yeah, he's like a very imperfect, just kind of like just whatever guy. So like, which to me shows how, effective the movie is because you still really feel bad when he's not able to get what he wants.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that's intriguing is he feels very human in the sense that he does things that maybe we don't want to celebrate. He's not this perfect man. I mean, he's problematic in a
He's
lot
the
of different
product of this
ways.
environment.
Yeah, exactly. And so he's sort of doomed to his own fatal flaws. And we see that throughout the entire film is like everything he does, like, like it's not going to work. And I think
It's
that's what's
yeah,
so
every
trying
time.
is like there's part of you it's like we know that this isn't going to work like no matter what he does and he just keeps right working his way sort of through this bureaucratic maze of first going to this place and then that place and the other
Yeah,
place and then eventually
it's
right
it's
yes and
it's so
I think too
hellish.
it truly and I think it's interesting how the wealthier class, they almost and I talked earlier about costumes. I think costumes is very important in this piece. Is you notice that all of the wealthier classes, they're all wearing suits.
They're wearing
Typically,
suits, yeah, like
they're always
French
wearing
people.
like grays, blacks, like very muted colors. And yet, the community that our protagonist is from, they're all wearing these vibrant blues and reds and greens
Yeah,
and
like
sort of
traditional
like
African garb.
exactly. And it's sort of like how the colonization has sort of seeped their culture out of
Yeah,
them and sort of drained it from them. And these things that they once celebrated, for hundreds, thousands of years. And, and, um, and not only celebrated, but like this idea of like all of them that makes them them, right? They kind of have to bury away. They have to hide it. They have to hide it under these muted grays and blacks
but
instead of
like
expressing it.
yeah, but all these people like except for maybe his like cousin that he meets at his house
Yeah.
or like nephew, his like family member who's like
Nephew.
reading with like his kid.
Yeah.
That guy of course is really nice. He gives him money. But pretty much everybody else who wears a suit in the movie are like evil and like kind of vindictive and um they like steal and they like lie and make and like take advantage of him. And I think the movie is like kind of like an indictment a little bit. It's funny. It's kind of an indictment on um like I guess education in the in the kind of Western imperialism and education, I guess you
Mm-hmm.
could say, right? Like, because like the guys in the suits, they're businessmen. You know what I mean? They they know French,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is powerful. And I think like it is true that like education is power, and it's like the most important thing in the world. But in this movie, and Sembène himself is an educated guy, right? Like if you look at his biography, he wrote tons of novels, he made
Yeah.
a bunch of movies, he was a political left-wing activist, he was very, very, very committed to the project of post-colonial Africa and telling the stories and stuff like that. And of course, obviously, he is he believes that like education and the creation of things like movies and books are important to the benefit of everyone. But he's also, I think, in the movie at the same time trying to say that like, however, um because uh people are educated kind of like, I guess, like in this kind of market based society, which France is,
Mm-hmm.
which has, which colonized Senegal for a long time. um they're like kind of they're like not they end up being bad people, right? Like they take advantage of people for money, and they think that money is the most important thing, or land and property is the most important thing. They're unconcerned with like religion. Like I guess you could say they're unconcerned with their quote unquote souls, right?
Yeah.
They're completely cynical.
And I think you made a good point earlier, which I want to bring up again when it comes to sort of the way these people are interacting with the people of the different classes is sort of this idea of being a product of their situation. And sort of how whenever we go to any sort bureaucratic room and we meet these bureaucratic people and they're like, I'm just doing my job, right? I'm just here, like I'm just
Hmm.
trying to make a living like everyone else.
Yeah,
And you can't help but be reminded of sort of the Nazi Germany mentality of right. So many people that were
I
part
guess.
of the
Yeah,
Nazi party.
again,
Well,
that's maybe a little.
I mean, it's not obviously to the extreme extent, but it's the same idea, right? We're just a product of this. Like we're just trying to get through the day, just like everyone else is here. And obviously, they're not enacting the horror or the terror that they're still doing, right? They're still perpetuating the same cycle of which, like, the people, the bureaucrats, like, even though they're sort of evil in their own way, they're also sort of products of a world that's higher up than them, and they're just trying to get through. Like that moment where he goes to get his birth certificate, I think, or he's showing his birth certificate, and they're
Yeah,
asking him like what month he is. Like before, when he walks up there,
he
like they're
doesn't
having
know.
that conversation. Like they're worried about like how they're gonna make a living too. Like they have the exact
Yeah, that
same
guy, the front
concerns.
desk guy is like is like upset, and like so because he's getting ripped off too, which is like
Hmm.
the point of it's the point of the entire this is the point of the entire like market-based capitalist system, is to rip off people for your own benefit. That's pretty much like it. Like that's kind of like how it works. That really, it is. Whether that be one person or a whole country. And yeah, like the guy's being ripped off. He's upset, and when Ibrahima is trying to get some help, the guy is just like, I don't care. Like I really don't care. Like I'm not. I really don't care if you need help. Uh, I don't. And I don't. I guess I don't blame him for feeling bad, but
Hmm.
again, it's just kind of like, it's just like these bad vibes, they like transfer from one person to another. Um, and then everybody doesn't, just, and only like a couple people, are able to come out on top.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea of how he thinks a community should be built is if you build a community upon the idea that one person is better than another person, or if you build it upon some sort of hierarchy, like you're only going to create chaos and confusion and destruction because everyone, it's the idea of like you put all those, was the crabs or whatever, you put them in a bucket and then like, they can never get out because they're always pulling each other down, even though they all
Yeah.
have the capability of getting out there. It's the same idea where like this community and any community can truly only function if they're sort of there to support each other. And the very fact that even if like you're not necessarily out to hurt someone, the very fact that you're not supporting your community, then you are part of the problem that eventually will lead to destruction of everyone involved. Because it's not just at the end of the day, right? It's not just him and his family that's ruined. Like when they buy that house, because it's clear what's happening, right? These wealthier people are buying, which is, I mean, it happens in Reno, it happens in Louisville, it
Yeah,
happens in the
it's
United
sort of a
States all the time.
gentrification thing.
It's
Yeah.
a gentrification, right? It's where the wealthy come to these poor towns, and then
Yeah.
they buy these houses, which, I mean, they literally have that conversation, right? Those two men in the car, they're like, we're gonna buy it for way less than it's worth because
Yeah.
they have no option here. Like it's that or they starve to death, they die. And we still see that, I mean, in our communities today, where we go to these right, these poor communities and we offer them, a sum of money for their home, which is well, under what it's worth, but because they're in the situation that they're in,
Yeah.
particularly in this situation, like they can take advantage of that and basically destroy these entire communities.
Yeah, and it's also a problem that in this case with the movie, it's also a problem that transcends like race and skin color, right? Like,
Yeah.
right? Because like basically everybody, there are no white people in the movie except like in the background.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, like everybody that is gunning for his property or is trying to rip him off or is, um, they're all Senegalese people, Senegalese people, and so it doesn't have to necessarily do, um, it's just I think once again to make the point that like this class like stratification can happen like anywhere, among any, it can erode solidarity so much, right? Like, and as soon as people have money, they forget, about their solidarity with each other as countrymen or as Muslims or however, whatever group it is.
Yeah, and so I'm currently reading Capital Part Two, which it plays into this just in the sense that, so in the first volume of Capital, his idea is that we should all be a bunch of like independent artists and we sell our work. The producers of our own means of labor, blah 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 blah. But in the second volume, his suggestion is that an economy, like a proper economy, like that isn't built off of this capitalistic idealism, is a circuit in which basically money neither needs to be created or destroyed because it's basically just this middleman that goes from one person to another. And the problem is that in a capitalist society, because you have to, right, there has to be a gap between what the person under you makes and what you make, right? There has to be that sort of break in the circuit. And that's what you're seeing here is like, if in the beginning of the film, there sort of is that circuit where they all are sharing food and water and rice and all these different things. And then once sort of the break in the circuit, because that money's sort of pushed into their local economy, then suddenly the whole circuit breaks and everyone's sort of um, preying upon each other. And I'm thinking right now of that moment where the wife buys that new bra, right?
Yeah.
Or she
Which
doesn't
is
even
like
buy it.
this like
Yeah.
it's like a European invention, right?
Hmm.
Like like that's what a bra is, right? Like it
Yeah.
has to like I'm pretty sure that is like a Western like thing.
Hmm.
Like, do people necessarily need bras? Like I guess they do. It's probably more comfortable. I'm not a woman.
Speaking as two men.
I'm just saying, like, it is like a
Right.
Western like
It
invention.
is. Absolutely.
And and again, but another scene I'm thinking of too. Um, um, sorry, I'm thinking. Um, uh, yeah, no, I forgot about the scene, but I'm just saying, like my point is that like as soon as you, as soon as you have a bunch of money, all of a sudden, or you think you're gonna have a bunch of money, all of a sudden you probably start shopping a little bit more, looking for more nice
Yeah.
things and things like that. Even though the thing that she's buying, a bra, you know, uh, uh, it probably would be nice to have one, but I
Hmm.
guess do you necessarily need to have one? I don't know. I guess it depends on your perspective, and um, but yeah, no, I agree. Like that's a good scene because it's like it. it just kind of like, and again, like in that same scene too, right? Like everybody, I think they talk about either in that scene or another scene, they talk about how like everybody just is visiting them now, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
everyone is
yep,
like, yeah,
yep. Yeah, they're all seeking their own fortune at this moment. And I think it's interesting because he's also playing on this idea of like, no matter how much money you have, and this is, I don't know what about, I don't know if it's like a cultural thing or if it's just a human thing, but like, it's as if the more money you make, the more money you spend,
of course.
right?
Yeah.
As if,
There's those stories of people in the United States, of regular people that get like lottery. They win the
right.
lottery and then they lose all their money and they're penniless. It's just like you can't help you. You're just and you and I are probably thinking that story and you're just like, what? Like how? Like how is that possible? I think it's just like I think because we live like in the market-based society that we do, again, as soon as you get a lot of money, all of a sudden nice things, that you used to covet, like suddenly become available. And I think again, like maybe salesmen start to bother you more often about things,
Mhm.
and investments too. Like people like probably bother you more often now about investments and things
Mhm.
like that. I just think that like again, the that's the point. The point is to take advantage of people.
Yeah, it's this inescapable terror, which we think, especially in America, in a capitalist-based society, okay, once we have this amount of money, once we have this thing, then we'll be safe, then we'll be okay, then we
Yeah.
don't have to worry about it. But as you climb up the
But
ladder, quote unquote,
everybody feels that way too. Everybody else feels the same
exactly.
exact way.
And it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter how far up that ladder you climb, you never feel safe. Like there's something incredibly human and instinctual about that need of like wanting to feel safe
Yeah.
and how we utilize capital and finances and money as sort of our modern day, protection. Like that's how we protect
Yeah.
ourselves from the world. So we always want more of it, and yet the more that we get, the more that we spend, and now we're always in this perpetual state. And that's has to how it has to be, right? Because
Mhm.
that's the only way a capitalist economy works. Is like the more money you make, the more money you have to spend. Because if you don't do it, then the money's no longer in the economy, and then everyone loses. So it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, Sabene is like he's super um part of me almost kind of wishes too we would have watched and discussed Black Girl because Black Girl is interesting because what he does in that movie. And I don't know,
Hmm.
Mandabi doesn't really do this. I think Mandabi is like more a style of his own. But in Black Girl, what he does is that he kind of he sort of like in a way copies the French New Wave style into the
That's
movie. So it's got
interesting.
so like in its editing, in its black and white photography, in I
Yeah.
would say the voiceover, maybe the writing to an extent. And so he's kind of like using the French tools to indict the country
Yeah.
itself and its racism, its greed, its sicknesses like alcoholism, um, you know, being slothliness,
Hmm.
um, so it's really interesting. And Mandabi, he doesn't really. I was expecting him to do a little bit more of that. I don't think it's like a very French new wave. So Black Girl, I guess, is even more interesting because he was probably being extremely like precise in what he wanted to do and how that movie looked and feel. Mandabi feels a little bit more of his own kind of thing going on, which I like. Um,
Yeah.
and of course, it's in color and it's very bright and nice,
Hmm.
which I do like a lot too. So, he again Mindabi to me is in the background, even though they don't really like talk about it at all in the movie. To me, it feels kind of like intertextually an indictment of the country, France,
Very
and
much.
how just like, a situation like Mendab, like what happens to Ibrahima in the movie, probably happens again and again and again in France, is what I think he's
Hmm.
trying to say.
Yeah. And for some reason, I couldn't get this thought out of my mind, but every time they go to the city, I couldn't help but think of films like Playtime. This idea of
Yeah.
sort of the monochrome, everything's sort of similar. It's weird, like the way that Like the gentrification is we build these giant office buildings that all look exactly the
roads,
same. Roads,
roads
right?
and
The
car like
cars.
car infrastructure.
Hmm. And then you compare, right? Because they do a lot of juxtapositions where they'll jump back and forth between like the small village and
Yeah,
the
that's
city
a
of Dakar. And
from the
you
from
kind
the
of see,
Sembène
yeah,
movies that I've seen, he does that. I think he's
okay.
interested in that. So I think you nailed it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's like I think yeah, like to him I think like the downtown
Hmm.
of the city of downtown, like downtown Dakar, which probably there are French people there, right? There are white people there.
Sure.
I think he sees it as kind of like the like a heart of darkness type of thing, right? Like
Yeah.
like the foibles and the problems with money and capital and this stuff is sort of like happening in downtown Dakar and it's reverberating out to the villages.
Hmm. And yeah, and as you're saying, it's sort of almost like this infection that's
Yeah,
slowly spreading its way outward until eventually it'll overtake the whole country, which is his fear, is that slowly and surely it's just going to consume everyone and everything, not only in this small community, but his entire culture. And we talked before sort of this idea of religion of soul, right? He's constantly
sure.
praying to Muhammad. They do their 5 prayers a day, and he talks a lot about that and sort of this idea of something outside of ourselves. Whether it's Muhammad or Jesus or Abraham or whoever, right? This idea of having something that's bigger than you, and once you sort of lose
Yeah,
that thing, that
right.
religion, whatever it is, you lose your
Yeah,
God, which is kind of like they sold their soul
right.
in that moment.
It's like giving is ultimately the right thing to do.
Hmm.
If given the choice between giving and not giving, obviously if you're deeply worried about your soul and about going to heaven, obviously you probably want to give if you are given the chance. But you're right, like as soon as people start questioning whether or not that they should give to people out of a fear of like not having enough, not having because the idea is like I might not I'm giving to someone but I can always rely on someone else if I need something as well, right? And so and that and with the injection of kind of like money of all this money and everything, it sort of ruins that, right? Because everybody is now worried about themselves and how much money they have compared to someone else, and like everybody's gets to be like paranoid and they covet each other. Um, and yeah, and so that of course affects their religion, right? And then all of a sudden they're all of a sudden like they're not worried about like giving, and sort of that probably leads to things like alcoholism, right? Like you become depressed that you're not following the Quran, or however you're not following the Quran the way that you feel like you ought to be. And I think people become depressed that way. So yeah, it all just kind of like is like a domino effect, really.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any other grand thoughts on this piece in particular. Do you?
I mean, it's great.
It is great.
It's a really really good movie. Um, yeah, I'm glad we watched it just because over Black Girl. I think ultimately just because I think it's a little bit more subtle than Black Girl. So I think it's right. I think there's a lot going on in terms of discussion. Black Girl is a very like striking movie. It doesn't it doesn't uh it kind of ends the same way as Mandabi, where like it kind of like Sembene, I think, is interested in like what happens once everything kind of falls apart, sort of, where he's like, once everything falls apart, when like, your religion isn't enough, when, your family isn't enough, when your neighbors aren't enough, like when everything is just sort of fall apart, well, what happens, And ultimately, I think it just leads to kind of self-destruction, whether it be selling your property, your shelter, um, the loss of your relationships, or just straight up suicide. Like I think like he's interested in how the anxieties of kind of like the French, of like the capitalistic, market based Western French society, is an infection, and it is going to ruin the country. As it had, and it sort of right, and it sort of already has, right, like through colonialism and through the extraction of everybody and their and its resources and just everything. But even once France leaves, right, like even once France isn't even a part of it, I think Sembène is trying to say that like the that that its effects have are now and its anxieties have now proliferated in other ways in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to wrap up with some final thoughts on this piece. Just go over a bit of everything we talked about and cover everything that I'm thinking at the moment. Which, first of all, incredibly well written and thoughtful, extremely intriguing piece of story and this exploration of what it means to be conquered or colonized, and sort of the not only destruction that comes from colonization, but even after that colonization leaves, sort of the decolonization of this country, how it's infected, as you were saying, this culture and these people, and how it'll slowly continue to infect the community and the culture and the entire country eventually, and sort of how there's no real stopping it. Like it's just going to happen no matter what we do, and there's just perpetual march of capitalism and sort of this violence and terror and hierarchy that is built off of it, and a great use of costumes and beautiful cinematography, great direction, really just an incredible piece all around. So I'm gonna end this with a very strong 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about it either. 8 out of 10 for me as well. Obviously, it's a great movie. It's an experience. It's a great movie, and I loved it. It's not really an experience I'm looking forward to like having again anytime soon, because it is like a very like anxiety
Hmm.
inducing movie. Like it's not like super fun. Like you when you're watching it, you're just like, man, it's not going to turn out well. And it doesn't. Again and again and again, it doesn't
It
turn out
does.
well. So it's not really like a movie that I'm like excited. It's not really a movie I'm going to return to anytime soon, really. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad movie. It's just that it's just an effectively frustrating experience, um, which is great in its own sense. And yeah, it's just a great African movie. And yeah, 8 out of 10.
All right, y'all. You can find everything I do at Austin Lugo.
I'm on Letterbox at Retro Andrew, RETR0 Andrew.
And you can find this podcast wherever your podcasts. You guys can find us Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at With Nothing to Say. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks.